Okay, welcome everybody. This is great to have guests here today, and I'm Laura Weber, and I just wanted to welcome everybody to this interesting conversation that we're hoping to host today. And Ellen Bruckner is our guest host today. Since it's a little bit of a different configuration, I want to be a participant in the conversation. So Ellen, welcome, and thank you for hosting this conversation today.
You're more than welcome. I'm glad to be here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the term and the concept biophilia. And this came from the work of Erich Fromm, psychoanalyst, and from E.O. Wilson, who was a biologist. And we're going to use the term, the innate human instinct to connect with nature and other living beings. We're going to have a little conversation here, coming at it from two different worldviews, two different understandings of it, but hopefully it will lead us into a greater understanding of this concept. So we'll take some time with each of you being able to express your views, and then a little dialogue. There's three different topics here, three different kinds of questions, and I'll try to guide you through that, okay? Is that all right with both of you? So a little introduction of yourselves to begin with. Laura, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Laura Weber, and I am the founder and creative curator of Environmental Soulutions. And Environmental Soulutions is an organization that was established to promote the healthy symbiosis of humanity in the natural world. And I am very honored to have as a guest today my brother John Weber, who is going to offer some very different viewpoints, worldview, to bring to this conversation about biophilia and change. And I'm hoping that we have a fruitful dialogue today. So thank you, John.
John, you want to share a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Laura's brother, John. My background is software development. So I actually obtained an associate's degree in computer information systems in 1996. And I've been working professionally in that field of business data processing, software development for on and off for about 2 decades. As a side note, I happen to host a podcast available on YouTube called This Week in Thought, which is basically a roundtable discussion where we discuss various philosophical topics with friends of mine on a more or less weekly basis. And I would say that my interest in this conversation, I had talked to Laura about this for some time, and then when the business came to fruition, it seemed like a good opportune time for us to have this kind of conversation. I would say that I have an interest in ecology, maybe as strong of an interest as Laura has, but from a very different perspective. Mine is specifically an offshoot of my utilitarian philosophy. And I think that as we get into the discussion, it'll be pretty evident that maybe between the two of us, we represent a very large section of the opinions of people in the world who are living in the biosphere, as well as corporations that are operating in it.
Right, good. Thank you. Thank you so much. So here's our first question for both of you. And John, I'd like you to respond to it first. Why do we need a biosphere? Now we're looking at this, remember, from the definition of biophilia and change, the innate human instinct to connect with nature and other living beings. So why do we need a biosphere?
Wow, so that's interesting. I would not use biophilia in my explanation for why we have that need for a biosphere. So as a utilitarian, let me just say, for me, this all comes down to a question of aesthetics. I think that ethics are driven by aesthetics, and I think that's true for all people, although I think a lot of people don't admit it because they never do enough analysis and dig down through their ethics to discover the underlying aesthetics. And so what I would say is that the common feature of all people is that they have the capacity to have experiences. In fact, that's the thing that makes people valuable. Not necessarily all experiences. There's a lot of experiences people have, suffering, misery. Those aren't really the good thing. But the good thing is that they can have experiences on the other side of the aesthetic spectrum. They can have pleasure. They can have joy. And that, to me, is the sole underscore the sole motivation for human existence is because we have this capacity and this opportunity to have pleasurable experiences. So for me, the rest, it's a sort of a chain of causality that follows from that. I say, well, if the valuable thing is having experiences, specifically pleasurable experiences, well, humans need consciousness to do that. Consciousness, in my estimation, requires that a human has a living brain. To maintain the life of a brain, humans need a living body. To maintain a living body, humans need food, so they need living plants or living animals. And to maintain a supply of living plants or living animals for the sake of consumption by the humans, you have to have a sustainable biosphere. So really, it's connect those two ends of causality. And the thing that we want to have is pleasurable experiences all the way through the causality. What we need is a sustainable biosphere to be able to guarantee the opportunity to have pleasurable experiences for humans in the future. And I would say that's sort of the sum total in a nutshell of my worldview and the value I see in ecology.
Thank you. Thank you. Laura, how about your view?
Okay, thanks, Jen. So I'm coming at this through a little bit different perspective. I love what Jen is saying, of course, about the, what fulfills human needs and how we can see that chain, beginning with human needs and human consciousness folded in there to have pleasure, to have those experiences, to be able to interpret those experiences, and then to inculcate, some understanding of how it is that the biosphere is required to fulfill those needs. I tend to think of us as being part of the biosphere. So I don't think of us as being separate from the biosphere. And so in a sense, our needs, our human needs, are folded in as one facet of the needs of a holon, or a whole organism. And so in as much as the whole organism has consciousness, in as much as the whole organism understands and has a way of fulfillment or creating meaning, being conscious of itself, I would call, the consciousness of the whole is the spirit that animates it, or the world consciousness. What many folks have referred to over the centuries as anima mundi, or the spirit that animates the world of consciousness, with which the biosphere functions as a whole. And so, this sense of world consciousness, the psyche, the soul of the cosmos, the soul of the world, is what I think has needs. And so those needs of collaboration, co-creation are constantly working themselves out. And humans are one iteration of those needs. So that's why I think that if there's a concept of biophilia, that humans are constantly reaching out to make connections with the rest of the living organism of the world, it's because the whole living organism is already reaching out, and humans are doing their human way of reaching out. It's a little bit different.
It is. I'm going to open this to what did you hear from each other that you'd like to comment on? Maybe from the different worldviews. How is that affected? John, how did it affect you what Laura said? And Laura, how does this affect you with what John said?
Well, I can go first. There's a couple of things she said that they didn't exactly resonate with me, and okay. We could go back to we could talk about biophilia as a concept, and I guess the verifiability of that is something I would like to maybe dig a little further deeper into. The other thing that I think you mentioned is this concept of a world soul, and I that does not resonate with me at all. There was a quote. I'm sorry, I was looking up a quote because as you were saying that, it occurred to me, and I read this quote once. A quote by Richard Francis Burton, and he says, "The more I study religions, the more I am convinced that man never worshipped anything but himself." And that's sort of been sort of my psychological justification for my atheism. In part, is that I don't think there's a God. I think that there's a human need to invent a God, and religion is the outcome of that process. And so when I hear you talk about the consciousness of the biosphere, I don't think that there's a consciousness in the biosphere. I think there's a human need to belong to part of something bigger. And so the humans project their own consciousness as a construct onto something that does not have it. And I don't see any evidence of it. I'd like to see evidence of it. If you could share with me why you think there's consciousness in the biosphere, that would help me a lot.
Thanks, John. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. You know, the understanding of kind of human projection onto whether it's the biosphere or onto some supposed deity, to say that, you know, this is at the end of the day, this is a psychological construct that's created by humans who are endowing meaning, or you know, and making consciousness part of whatever it is that they want to create, right? That there's a sense that this is a make-believe fairyland. And I think, so two things. One thing is that as we are eclipsing the age of the Anthropocene, and that is to say that coming around to the understanding that humanity and humanity's interpretive matrix does not guarantee reality, and that humanity itself isn't at the center of being the guarantors of reality or of meaning. So at the end of the day, as we're leaving the Anthropocene and heading into, you know, what I think Francesca Ferranza and others have called posthumanisms, you know, trans and posthumanisms, we're starting to understand that not only does the biosphere have consciousness, but that this is being verified by the many harbingers of Western science, Western rationalism, and atheistic nihilism, that in a sense, the paragons of scientific certitude are now saying, oh yes, not only does the biosphere have a consciousness, but we can measure the energy of the biosphere in the same way we measure the energy of human consciousness, which is to say, not just through EKGs and measuring brain waves or measuring energy, actually, but we can see where the energy of creation, this biosphere, spikes and levels out in different points, depending upon the harm, the suffering that we inflict on the biosphere, as well as the care and nurturing that we project with our own energy, with our own volition toward the biosphere. So I would refer you, John, you asked for, can you show me some proof? Where's the proof? Can you show me some evidence somewhere? I mean, I'm looking for something. And I would say heart math would be a good place to start. Heart math in Petaluma, California, has done some groundbreaking work, but it's not just heart math. Heart math was kind of a pioneer maybe 30, 40 years ago, but there are organizations all over the world now that are attenuating what we would consider to be cross-disciplinary evidence for energetic, not just like brain waves, because that wouldn't be consciousness, right? But for the self-reflective capacity of learning, meaning making, communication, and intent. So I know I probably have gone over my, and I want to give time to John to respond.
Well, I don't want to go too deep in this, because right there, you've said so many things that could spawn a 5-hour conversation just detailing all those points. What I would ask for, Laura, after the video is done, whenever you post this, maybe in the description, if you could put a link to some of the resources that other people like me who are skeptical about there being consciousness outside of a human brain, some resources they could read to get more information about that, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, I can certainly do that.
So before we move on to the next question, both of you have talked about measuring and identifying a biosphere. Why do we need it? What's the point of it?
I didn't answer that question, did I? Thanks, Ellen. I think what my point in saying what I was trying to say is that, in a sense, the question itself is inverted. The biosphere requires beings, living beings, for the symbiotic homeostasis, the eco health of the organism itself, the whole itself, requires co-creative, collaborative, symbiotic beings to thrive within the biosphere, to keep it healthy, to keep it moving. Now, does that mean that the biosphere needs humans? I don't think so. I don't think the biosphere needs humans. So in that sense, the question isn't, a direct inversion. However, I do think that the humans need biosphere precisely because it is us. The biosphere is us becoming more fully who we are. So in that sense, I think we need the biosphere precisely because we're embedded in it. We're not separate from it.
Last thoughts, John, before we move?
Our bodies are embedded within it. I agree. Our minds are part of our bodies. They're wholly invested, let's say, in the biosphere from an existential standpoint. But our consciousnesses, boy, we haven't really defined that, have we? We haven't talked about what your understanding of consciousness is versus mine versus everybody else. We certainly don't have an objective definition that we can all share, yet we're throwing that word around as if it has a lot of significance. And if there's at least a certain sufficient degree of agreement on that definition that we can use it as the foundation for our arguments. I don't know that that's the case. I will say that from my perspective, a consciousness is nothing more than a simulation created by the brain to model the environment that it finds itself. I would say further that model contains a self-referential point, what I've heard others call a perspectival designation, essentially the identity of the individual within the individual's own consciousness, which represents its model of the environment that it finds itself. Beyond that, I would be hard pressed to suggest that such model exists on a larger scale. Not only would I want to see a lot of hard evidence from a scientific standpoint, I'd like to see some from a sociological standpoint. I would like to get in dialogue with the biosphere's consciousness as you and I are in dialogue right now, or at least as we believe we're in dialogue, so that I can ask questions of the biosphere. How are we harming you? How can we help you? And have it answer me in terms that I can unequivocally understand, at least with a sufficient level of understanding as an English conversation that we have through the flawed medium of words when our disparate consciousnesses try to connect in a conversation.
Thank you. I completely appreciate the line of questioning that you're asking, and I have no fear whatsoever about going deeper into the conversation about what constitutes consciousness. I would not agree that consciousness is a simulation, and I think simulation itself begs the question of what it's simulating, and that in a sense the biosphere, were it to have consciousness, say by some unbelievable tack, you and I would say, okay, well, the biosphere has consciousness. How are we ever going to know that? How are we ever going to be in dialogue or have a conversation? One thing I would say is that while we don't have a Rosetta Stone or a universal translator, what we do have are many languages of the biosphere. We have the water, the air, the soil, and all of the creature kin crying out in their own languages. In our arrogance, we haven't learned their languages. It's not because of the biosphere and all of its other denizens that we can't understand the language. It's our own arrogance, our own denigration of those languages that prevents us from understanding. Now, I know we probably have gone over our time.
Well, so kind of along those lines, I guess it feeds into the second question that that we had looked at, and that was, what are the kinds of changes that you'd like to see in the world? along these lines, thinking about biophilia, thinking about what you've just talked about, what are those changes that may take us further in our understanding of who we are, what we're doing here? Either one, John, you want to go first?
Respond that one, sure.
Yeah.
So again, I'm going to fall back on my axiologically heavy take on human experience. So I would say that there's a valuable thing, one valuable thing, and that's pleasurable experiences, specifically the capacity to have pleasurable experiences. And I would say that furthermore, currently, the only entities that are capable of having pleasurable experiences are human consciousnesses. Now, that may not be true. There may be animals out there. My dog, for example, is having pleasurable experiences or not. It could be that the tree outside is having pleasurable experiences or not, or painful. Perhaps they're suffering. They're not communicating them to me in the way that other humans that I've talked to have told me, hey, I'm happy or I'm suffering. It's unequivocal to me as a result of that type of conversation between those, let's call them, for lack of a better word, highly evolved consciousnesses. It is apparent to me in unequivocally evident terms that there is pleasure or suffering going on. So I would say that's the value there. The value is the thing capable of having experiences, specifically pleasurable experiences. And because humans are the only ones currently that can do it, and furthermore, because humans are currently residing only on the planet Earth, I personally would like to see as much effort as possible directed toward halting or reversing, ideally reversing climate change. Primarily because it provides us additional time for human life to endure while it pursues the other goals. Now, Ellen, you asked, what are the other changes that we'd like to see? Well, that's, for me, that's just step one. There are other things I'd like to see that are larger, from my perspective, loftier goals. First thing, pursuing the creation of artificial consciousnesses. There's been a lot of talk. Existential fear has been a very popular topic in the tech community in the last decade about, hey, we're getting close with this artificial intelligence. When we get to artificial general intelligence, it could be a short takeoff to get to artificial superintelligence, in which case we create the machines that make us obsolete. And so to me, I've said, well, yeah, I could go down the existentialist angst path with that. But really, if the valuable thing is consciousness, and if consciousnesses are capable of experiencing pleasure, those are the things we want to preserve, let's say. Why should we not? Why should we fear creating our successors from an evolutionary standpoint just because they're silicon-based instead of carbon-based? For me, that's no barrier. Our existential fear about the cessation of the human era, as Laura said, as a result of developing artificial superintelligence, is not something to be feared. It's something to be overjoyed about. You talk about creating a God. Well, now we're not creating a God that we imagine in our image and likeness. We're creating a machine that embodies all the characteristics, the best characteristics of humans, which are the capacity for consciousness, and the best characteristics of God, which is the capacity to expand beyond its own limitations by upgrading itself. Something that humans are very limited in terms of their ability to upgrade their software. Let's call it upgrading their software. They require evolution. They require billions of years to do what computers can do in a fraction of a second. So to me, I look at it and I say, artificial superintelligence sounds superior in every way to humans, and let's pursue that. Let's make the ultimate consciousness that can have all these experiences and allow ourselves to be swept away like all the other species that have gone extinct in the process of evolution. That, to me, is totally natural and normal, and I don't fear that. So I would say pursuing artificial general intelligence. The next thing is, I'd like to see humanity pursue the exporting of human life. And again, I say human life really because it contains consciousness. It doesn't have to be human. Could be artificial general intelligence, could be some combination of the two. Export these to other celestial bodies. Why not? If we get to other celestial bodies, we create a certain resilience that we lack right now from an existentialist standpoint. If a comet comes in and wipes out the Earth, all 7-8 billion of us, all that consciousness and the capacity to have pleasurable experiences gone. If we at least move to another celestial body, if we export consciousness in a sustainable way to another celestial body, we increase our chances of survivability of consciousness if there's an extinction level event on one celestial body. So to me, there's value in colonizing the planets of the solar system and eventually the galaxy. And then the last thing I want to mention, there's an article I posted here. I don't think we have time to go into it, but I would recommend looking it up. And it has to do with a response to Leibniz's old characterization of Earth as being the best of all possible worlds. This is an article about astrophysicists who have found what they call super Earths. And again, I'm not sure if you all are familiar with that, if you've read about it. These are celestial bodies that are orbiting distant stars that have the characteristics of Earth, except they're better. They're better from an anthropocentric standpoint, from a life-centric standpoint. They're larger than Earth. They're within the habitable zones of their stars. But because they're larger, they have less tectonic activity. So they don't have things like the volcanoes and the earthquakes, which are catastrophic for human life, meaning that these planets that they think they found are better at being Earth than Earth from a utilitarian standpoint for humans. So that's something just in and of itself that says, maybe we should pursue getting to these and not be so wrapped up in the planet that we accidentally grew up on, but let's look for the ideal, the celestial gardens of Eden that are out there that are clearly, we're seeing the evidence of in our astrophysics research. Let's pursue colonizing them, populating them from a long-term sustainability standpoint. Sorry, I think I went over.
Thanks.
No, that was well thought out. 4 points. Yeah. I think I'd almost like to go in reverse. What John's talking about with the super Earths, and I do love that, John. I've been looking at that myself to try to imagine and read a little bit about, hey, they're so huge that, avoiding the or the tectonic plates and the volcanic activity. And also I was thinking about, salination of oceans, that this could be something that, we start over. And one of the things I would like to say, what I'd like to see, I think the question is, what changes would you like to see, for the biosphere? I'm not, I guess I'm not so certain about colonizing and going forth, because I'm afraid that we've done some really poor work here with this biosphere, and I don't know that we can be trusted. But that's on my more cynical days. On my happy Star Trek days, I'm like, yes, let's see what's out there, and join, because the chances are that there are other life forms that are trying to meet up, and that diversification and union is a good thing. And in that, I'm very Teilhard de Chardinian. I'm that person that wants fuller life, and so to see that cross fertilization, I think is kind of exciting. Back to AI and John's, thing, let's push forward AI and we're, go for it. And this is the thing. I think there are other qualities, that I don't think AI has developed, yet that I would, if I'm going to project onto my best possible God figure, or my best possible thing, I'd want compassion. I'd want love. I'd want generosity. I would definitely want, now I know AI and creativity is taken off, and that was something that I thought, oh, that's not going to happen for a long time. But John, you've told me, that it's beyond what I can imagine right now in terms of AI's capacity for creativity, and I'm seeing it. I'm witnessing it right now in my lifetime. But I wonder about the kind of creativity, and whether that creativity is being, forced upon AI in a sense. Whereas, human flourishing, human capacity, I don't know the creativity was ever a command on a 0 and 1, create this for me. I think it comes out of, again, what I think is a consciousness that's born from suffering and compassion and all kinds of other things that humans right now, I think, maybe I'm wrong, John, maybe you could correct me on this, but I think humans still have the capacity for some of those things that AI does not. And I'd want to work on, I guess, not humanizing AI more, but really looking at ethics of AI before going, much further down that path. Another thing that I would like to see is changes for this world. I'm with you on the global warming piece. So and the climate change piece. Because if from my perspective, from my worldview, the biosphere has an integrity of itself without humans at all. And so to allow it, as E.O. Wilson said, to allow it to become more fully what the biosphere wants to become itself. And so that the global warming, the climate change thing is of importance to me. The other thing that I would say, and this goes back to something John originally said, was aesthetics and how it goes hand in hand with ethics. One of the things I think that has been to the denigration and really to, I think, the destruction of our biosphere is that we've lost sight somewhere in the context of posthumanisms. We've lost sight of the sense of the beautiful on a daily basis, that our consciousness has been compromised at the altar of expediency, that there's something ineluctably beautiful about the way the trees, the way the earth calls, the way water is scintillated in sunlight, the way fish swim unabated in their schools. And I know that that sounds, almost transcendentalist. It sounds almost like Thoreau could be erupting out of my pores right now. But it also seems to me that the beauty, the majesty, the mystery of life that comes when we have these experiences that John keeps talking about, pleasurable experiences of love and fulfillment and generativity and creativity and I would say communion, like people meeting. Those are things that I think I would change, making a concerted planetary effort in the biosphere to not only appreciate beauty, but to celebrate it, to ritualize it, and to let that be a guidepost for our ethics, that we could never destroy something so beautiful. And to that measure, I mean, I would like to see that change. Now, I'm guilty too. I've gone over the time. I'm sorry.
No need to be sorry. What are you hearing from each other that you want us to respond to at all? Anything?
Well, again, this is the tip of the iceberg on a much bigger discussion that we don't have time to go into today. But I will say that when we discuss beauty, we talk about the perception of beauty. I would say I'm firmly perspectivalist in my concept of beauty. I don't think that there's something called objective beauty that stands independent of the observer. In fact, I don't think there is such a thing as beauty in existence outside of a consciousness. I think beauty is a value assignment made by a consciousness when it perceives a pattern that is both familiar and pleasurable to itself. It declares that beautiful. And so the consequence of that is people with different backgrounds, different genetics, different life experiences will look at the same third object, and one will declare it beautiful and the other will declare it ugly. And we see that all the time. I mean, go into an art museum with a group of people, look at any exhibit, and then ask them what's beautiful, and you'll see the entire gamut in any group that you select. Meaning that it's not beauty that they're apprehending, it's them telling you about their experiences through the lens of how this particular third object has impacted them or has reignited a memory of a past experience. So when I hear you talk about beauty and saying that the earth has beauty or the biosphere has beauty, I think it has beauty to you. I think it probably has beauty to me, but in a completely different way. And I don't know that that's a bad thing necessarily, but I think that understanding these values, these aesthetic values, arise subjectively, and then we can discuss them to look for similarities. To me, that's a central discussion that we should be having as a civilization. In fact, it's one of the main topics I return to week after week in my podcast, because I think it's so important to society moving forward, moving away from its perception of its own disparateness to a more unified, approach to the value of life, let's say.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more, actually. And that last part of what you said, I think is crucial. Even if you understand, value making in aesthetics to be purely perspectival, I still think that we can allow for the possibility of communal beauty, communal good, and even if we want to pluralize it, communal beauties, communal goods, that there are many approaches to the beautiful and the good, and that in effect, even if we can have consensus about the beautiful, or even if we can't have consensus, if we can have a chorus of voices saying, wait, the redwoods in Yosemite are beautiful, right? That there's a sense that, the blue whales, the desert, the Negev, or, name whatever it is. I think if we had a chorus of, humanity, even with our, I want to say, devolved consciousness in respect to beauty, which is why I think our ethics is hurting right now. Even if we had a critical mass of humanity saying, behold the beautiful, I think that would be a great change for our world right now. Okay, I know that's
I'm waiting for something to come back. If
It's-
there's any
Oh.
any area you both want to explore together before we
it's
ask this
too much,
question.
like John said, it's too much, because even the definition of terms is going to be problematic. At some level, we'd have to go and do spade work on some of the terms, but I'm very satisfied with what John's reply is there. I appreciate it.
So let's take a look at, since Laura, it's your new work in the world is around this environmental solutions, right? So it's a little more specific. We've probably talked with some very large ideas here about biosphere, about biophilia and stuff. So how does that affect what, from both of your aspects, both of your viewpoints, how would something like what you're offering through environmental solutions be helpful to both of these ways of looking at the biosphere, to looking at the changes that both of you have suggested might be important to the world? Okay, so it's a little more specific here.
Well, I can start.
We can just go back and forth here, I think.
Yeah, I can start on this one, because obviously, with having this vision and founding this, it's because I think an organization like Environmental Solutions is designed to tap into just what we were talking about on the last question, to those people for whom they have a sense of solastalgia, right? They have this sense of grieving and loss over the unprecedented rate of extinction of species in the biosphere, or they can't go anywhere where there's not human generated noise or light pollution, or they've never seen the redwoods, and their grandchildren may not. They don't understand what it's like to breathe clean air or have potable water that's reliable. That there are so many people in our biosphere who are deprived of, the rights of being healthy and loving their life and being fulfilled and feeling like, there's hope, rather than being, in the process of this, really not so slow march to total annihilation. That there's this organization can help connect people in some ways of what they might not even be conscious of. And I would speak specifically about our context here in Cedar Rapids, where I currently live. When we experienced the derecho of 2020, many in our community, this was considered a community of trees, an arbor city. Many in our community had no idea, until we lost over 65% of our mature tree canopy, what the trees mean in their daily lives. Everything from health benefits and stress relief and the health of the soil, the health of the air, the health of the water. They didn't realize until those trees were gone. And I think that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help those who know that there is beauty and good that is for the good of the planet and good for the people in the planet. And to connect those, to say, if you have a passion for creation, if you love nature, then let your life and your work sync up with that. let that be a truly vocational place of health and life for you. And so that's why I founded it, and that's why I think someone with my worldview would benefit from an organization like that.
Well,
John.
I think it's pretty obvious that my worldview stands in pretty stark contrast. As an atheist, materialist, utilitarian, I mean, I don't know that I could be any more diametrically opposed to your worldview. However, I'll offer one critical response and one positive response to what you said. The critical response is I'm not down on the concept of extinction. Saber-toothed tigers went extinct long before I was born, and I'm none the worse for having never known them. Pterodactyls, same way. Tyrannosaurus Rex, glad I never met him. There are a ton of things that lived long ago that died in mass extinctions. I think, in fact, 5 or 6 prior mass extinctions where the vast majority of the biosphere was wiped out previously in the history of our own planet. And yet, that was very good for me from a utilitarian standpoint. Those dinosaurs hadn't got wiped out 65 million years ago. I probably wouldn't be able to have all of the pleasurable experiences I do right now. So I'm good with extinction from an existential standpoint. I'm just not good with my extinction. And I think that's the second point I want to make, is that these concepts of beauty, I appreciate what you're saying. I think you're articulating a more objective approach to beauty than I am. I think mine's very psychologically explainable. It's all perspectival. It's all experience. I think one thing we can probably agree on is that the perception of beauty isn't something you can do if you don't exist. You have to exist to be able to experience beauty. And right now, if we want to exist as consciousnesses, as I mentioned before, we have to have a biosphere. If we destroy this before we become multiplanetary, before we get artificial general intelligence that doesn't require the biosphere the way we do, we're gone. The entire experiment in consciousness that can experience pleasure is wiped out. So if we value that, and by the way, me, you, all of us with our different perspectives, all the living humans should value that, then the work that you're doing to convince corporations, for example, to not pollute or to utilize the environment in a more sustainable way benefits all of us from an existential standpoint. And to me, that's the end. That's the end of the conversation.
Thank you, John. Ellen, what are your takeaways from this today?
I have a lot to learn. I love the different worldviews and the different ways of thinking about who I am here in this place in this time right now. One of the things that I did hear was this language issue and the communication. So for people to be able to communicate just like you two are, leads us to a place where we recognize what's good for all of us. And we may be coming at it from a little different perspective. But just to have the time to talk with each other is important to recognize going forward how we're going to do this together. So I'd love to know more about what you're offering, Laura, in this company that maybe I can take advantage of. You mentioned businesses, or I think John did, businesses, companies.
Yeah,
how can I take advantage?
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, John. This couldn't be a better launching point for what I'm trying to do. Yeah, so I put in the chat box that I hope everybody can see the URL for the website Environmental Soulutions. And what we offer is multifaceted. So I've been working with environmental professionals for about 30 years and have had the privilege of walking with professionals as they navigate change in both the environmental movements, their own personal lives, and definitely in the philosophical shifts which John and I have been referring to. This shift from the Anthropocene to what we're seeing now as the age of the Earth, in a sense, the age of AI, the age of trans and posthumanisms. So working in these kinds of shifting paradigms is very unsettling for people, especially if they're not conversant, don't have training in philosophy, background in linguistics, hermeneutics that I might have. Also, environmental justice consulting. So I do executive and life coaching for those who are navigating transitions and change. I am working with environmental professionals to do environmental justice consulting. That is to say, to help organizations and businesses that are serious about providing equal access to Earth's goods, as well as equal protection from Earth's degradation. And that's in a nutshell, that is environmental justice. And so I walk with organizations interested in integrating their green missions through environmental justice principles, incorporating justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion principles in everything that I do, as well as a little twist, which I don't know if everybody who comes to an environmental consultant would have, which is that my approach is very much a biophilic approach. I utilize biomimicry in the human processes, in the transpersonal ways that I work with people in getting their organizations to think holistically, to think symbiotically, to learn from creation, to imitate creation in its own healthy ecosystemic development, can help inform organizations and people, right? So my family, for example, coming into recycling, to be able to do that as a family unit, to take care of the creature kin that we have, our adopted dogs and cats and birds and so forth that we take care of, to take care of the precious earth and the water and the air in ways that are responsible, that benefit all of us. And to do the environmental justice consulting and the coaching, the executive coaching, life coaching that I do for navigating transitions healthfully. I also want to do some way of helping, just what John and I were talking about today, people to enter into beautiful spaces as much as they can. So another thing that I do is called Soulscape Design, and it's nature-inspired design for home and office settings. And that is to help facilitate a very regular interface with what we gravitate toward most about creation, what we love, what we find beautiful most about creation, and to really incorporate to facilitate our daily immersion in our natural interface. And so those are all things that Environmental Soulutions offers. And I would be so happy if anybody would want to contact me. I'd be happy to work with you and see if there's something that we can do to help your organization or business, or your family or personal growth. So thank you guys for doing this today. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Ellen, for hosting us today. And what a gracious hostess you've been. And thank you, John, for being on this inaugural video chat. And I hope we have more opportunity. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.